September 8th, 2020 is now 5 o'clock.
Mayor Steve Gander, Council President.
Mr. President, can we get you to turn your mic on?
It is on. Mike.
Can you hear him, David?
Nope, I can't hear him yet.
Can you hear me on this one?
Yep, I can hear you now.
I'll switch it. Go ahead, Megan.
Okay, Council President Markholtz?
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Russell? Councilmember Stordahl?
Here.
Dale Helms?
Here.
Tim Riepel?
Here.
Tim Johnson?
Here.
Mark Merz?
Present.
Does term. Quorum number 1, consider drive-in movie special event, Downtown Development Association. Blue, you're on. I'll just hand it off to you, and if you want to explain it, and if people have questions, they can ask you directly, sir.
Sounds good. So we are working with the Blue Moose as well as Penny over at River Cinema to put on, at this point, a couple movies. We're still waiting on one sponsor to secure to do 2 of them, but for sure we're going to be doing the October 1st one. We are looking at a couple different movies, so we'd be doing Beetlejuice and the 2007 version of Halloween, which is a rated R film, but working with River Cinema to make sure to limit the ages that are in there, and we would try to keep it at 100 cars max, which averages out to be about 2.5 people per car, to keep it at that 250 person limit. But working with the different restaurants in that area, so Blue Moose, and then we're trying to figure out what our other restaurant would be to make sure that we have contactless delivery for food. So people would bring their cars in and park, and then from there they would be able to watch the movie and get food delivered to their car. That would be in the parking lot that is east of the one directly behind River Cinema. So using that space, and I don't know if you guys have maps of it, but I could also send those out.
We've got it.
We have the maps. It'd be straight north of the fire department there. So.
Yep.
Does anybody have any questions? I see no questions, sir.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Number 2, request to hire paid on-call staff. Chief Boushee.
Yes, thank you, Council President and Councilman. I am making this request because historically we have carried a roster of 25 paid on-call members. We are down to 19 right now. Over the past couple of years, we just have not replaced firefighters. So I'm asking to hire 6 paid on-call for now. And then within the next year or so, I'm anticipating 3 more, possibly 3 more retirements. So again, to maintain that 25 number, I would like to request that we have the authority to just maintain that 25 roster. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Chief Boushee? I see none, sir. Thank you so much. Move on to number 3, request to declare items as surplus. Mr. Stordahl, if you want to go first.
So we just have a list of items there that we no longer use or have a need for between us and the Parks Department. And we just wanted to have council declare them surplus so that we can auction them or sell them at a future date.
Reid, do you have anything to add, sir?
Yeah, unless there's any questions on the items.
Anybody have any questions for either one of them?
I would just like to add, I know it's not on the agenda, but the police department is working at,
Thanks, Megan. If no other questions, we'll move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Mr. President,
I'll
Mr.
jump.
Galstad is not
Yep.
logged in yet, so can
I'll
we
jump to number 5. Discussion on 2021 proposed budget and levy. Ms. Anderson and Mr. Murphy.
Karla,
Okay,
you can go.
Okay, thank you, Council President. Earlier, in August, a couple weeks ago, we presented the general fund levy and budget. And now we have the enterprise funds that I sent to you, and it's part of the package. I also sent you an updated summary sheet of the general fund with the 5% levy per the mayor. And we took out $130,000 for the campground road patch, which we know is still needed, but we need to work with the DNR to help fund that collaboratively. The parks dump truck was estimated at $75,000 when we did the budget. Reid has gotten better numbers, and it's closer to $50,000, so we reduced that by $25,000. And the employee insurance changed from family to single, so there's a savings of $8,814. So we sent you that, and then we sent the budget for the enterprise funds, the electric, the sewage, the refuse, water, and stormwater. And a recommendation would be that we would set the levy for the general fund at 5%, which is due to the county by the end of September. And our next meeting is September 15th, and that's the last city council meeting in September. So our recommendation would be to set the preliminary levy at 5%. Any questions, comments?
Anybody have any questions at this time?
Thinking.
Mayor?
Thank you so much, everyone, for all the work that goes into this. So many moving parts and a lot of give and take. And thank you to the department heads, city administrator, all of you for coordinating this. If we're moving on from this item, I agree wholeheartedly that the preliminary amount set at 5, and again, what that carries to each individual family is going to be a lot less than that. Could be 2 or 3, it could be 0, just depending upon how much growth we've had and all the rest that's happening. And I know you're still working to drill down that bottom line negative number, which is still shown in the current document around that 357. And unless there's a newer one that I'm not seeing right here. Karla, have you gotten that down from that number?
No, those were just those changes that I talked about that got us to that number.
Yep.
And so presently we're at that number, and we have talked with department heads to see if they have any ideas. I guess the other thing is that to you, Councilman, if you have any ideas how to get that down. I know on one discussion they talked about maybe actually spending on capital improvements, and so I guess we need more discussion on that.
Yep. And so keep up the good work. I like the direction that you're headed and the way that it's happening. And I know we'll get to that number that we can all agree to, or the majority of us anyway. Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions at this time? This only means that we're setting it. It doesn't mean it's set. We're not going to set it till December. So we have time to work on it still. So just keep that in mind. Mr. Helms.
Correct.
Mr. Helms, you have a question, sir?
I just have one for Karla. Are you going to be in the office one day? I'd like to come and sit down and talk to you on this a little bit. Or when it could be.
Absolutely. How about I'll give you a call after the meeting and we can set up a time.
Okay, because I'll be, okay, yeah, that'll be fine. Let's do that.
Possibly tomorrow.
Possibly tomorrow. I'll be out of town Thursday, Friday, so that's fine.
Okay, I will call you after the meeting.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Anybody else have anything at this time? I see none. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Number 6, discussion on CARES Act funding. Mr. Gorte and Ms. Anderson.
I'll take that first since my RCA was first on the agenda or in the packet. What I did was I took the current expenses that we have had for the pandemic COVID-related expenses, and then we actually threw in some estimates and what the city has spent to mitigate them. We also have personnel costs for overtime because of shortage of employees, because of quarantine and such, and also the mitigation. And so with all those expenses, it came to $421,695. And that's out of the $645,000 that we received. So that would be a remaining allocation of $246,950. And I know there was some discussion on the city wanted to maybe hold back some dollars in case the city had some more costs. I know when we talked about this at our department head meeting, that a couple of the department heads were concerned that if there was a spike in COVID numbers and people had to be quarantined, that we'd have to have a cost of overtime because of the COVID. And so at the time when I did this, our recommendation was to give $100,000 at this time to match the $250 from the county. Some cities actually are having two phases. So the first phase, they're given a certain dollar amount, and then when they see what the need is, they see what the city's needs are, and just kind of where we're at in the pandemic, and see what's left over, they'll have another phase. But I just wanted to update you that. Now this is your discussion, and Paul also has more of the discussion.
In the RCA that I provided to you, I talked about what other cities were doing. I talked about what we were doing, and I talked about what the EDA had suggested. The EDA wants to look at hard costs only, and so that we can actually have a paper trail so that when all the dollars are audited, we have a good accounting for every dollar that was spent for this. EDA also talked, recognizing that there are approximately 250 businesses within the city, that if each business had asked for $5,000 or was eligible to receive $5,000 worth of expenses, at the $250,000 level, that's 50 businesses. At $350,000, that's 70 businesses that could be assisted. And the EDA wanted to stretch the dollars as far as possible, which is why they had recommended a $5,000 cap as well.
Anything else, Paul?
No, sir. And I apologize. My computer does not have a working camera, so I can't.
All right. We know what you look like.
Probably you're better off not seeing me right now.
Right. Mr. Vetter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Karla, the money that we spent and what we're anticipating to spend, does that include money for water and light in there?
Yes, we are looking at the city and water and light as one entity. And so we are making sure that the mitigation is covered all across the city. So they're doing work in the water treatment plant. They're doing work at the DSC. And we are covering any overtime that has happened in either facility.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Helms.
Karla and Mr. Gorte touched on it. The EDA we're looking at setting that $5,000 limit, but on that deal, it's that $5,000 is to be used for like supplies, like hand sanitizer, maybe plastic they had to put up, things like that. We're not going to allow the businesses to collect any payroll or any business expenses other than COVID related. So I'm a little concerned that the city wants to collect all this overtime and everything with that money. I'm a little concerned now that Mr. Vetter brought it up that you're going to take care of the water and light with that money. I think water and light's probably got enough to handle themselves. I think that money do better off going to the businesses instead of going to paying overtime for the city employees. That's the way I feel about it, because we're not going to let the businesses collect any overtime or anything like that for their employees or anything through the EDA. So I just feel that that's probably not the right thing to do for the city either.
I just want to clarify that the overtime is only COVID related, and we are very specific on that overtime.
Okay, I understand that, but we're still the businesses are going to have to produce slips on what they spent for COVID expenses, which and I do believe, Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we talked about it and was not going to let them collect anything for wages.
That's correct.
That is correct.
Maybe, Ms. Anderson, if you can maybe elaborate on specific COVID overtime expenses, maybe that would help. That would explain it more.
Okay, so for the city expenses, it's if we had to mitigate, say, police officers, we had people that were quarantined. So then we had to call in officers that had already had a shift. So the overtime was directly tied to a COVID-related incident. And that would be the same thing with the fire. And yes, we are not planning on reimbursing any business in the city of East Grand Forks for any kind of payroll expenses. It's only COVID mitigating expenses. So that would be sanitizers, that would be restaurants that had to build outdoor seating. So, and we need their exact receipts of those expenses.
Exactly, but that's my point. We're not letting the businesses collect any overtime or anything like that for expenses. So why does the city think that they should have to get paid for overtime and expenses? They can probably absorb that a lot better than most of our businesses right now, because I'll tell you what, if we don't do something soon here with these people, another month, there's going to be so many people in East Grand Forks that's going to close, it's going to be crazy. So that's why I kind of feel that I don't see why the city should be able to collect and pay overtime when the businesses can't do it.
Within that estimation of overtime or hard numbers of overtime, what is that dollar amount, Karla? Do you know that?
All we have right now at this time is what we've actually paid. There is no estimate for any additional future overtime expenses.
Okay, what is that dollar amount right now then for overtime?
Off the top of my head, just a second. $40,000 maybe. Out of the 160, I know that 21,000 of that is water and light, or water. So I'd have to look that up. I'm sorry, I don't have that right off the top of my head. But it's 168,000, and that has to do with personnel, that has to do with sanitizers, it has to do with cleaning, because we have additional cleaners coming into buildings. We have plexiglass that we put up in every department. We ordered masks, so that's $168,000.
So Karla, could you go into a little bit as far as what the anticipated, the 253 is included in that?
Yes. So out of the 253, the most of it is tied to air handling. So HVAC systems, there's some things you can do to mitigate that. There's a part you can put on the air handlers to clean it, so it cleans bacteria and viruses. We are looking at doing that at every city building where there are people that are there often. Right now, our biggest expense is at the arenas, and we just have a guesstimation on that, but that is our largest expense. Obviously, that's our largest building, the two arenas. So most of that is in the heating and air conditioning areas, and then we also have some in technology. For example, the library, so that they can mitigate away from other employees and social distance, they need sanitizing products. Charlotte can explain this better if you have questions on it. Because they have one set now, but they need another set so they can check people out faster and more thoroughly and have a better cleaning system. And that's really what most of it is. Most of it is their air handling systems, because they average probably 7,000 to 10,000 a building.
I know that the discussion of the air handling, I know that, like you indicated, the two largest buildings are the arenas, and I know that people are watching and maybe have questions, and I maybe would offer Reid, if he wanted to explain that more, he could. If he doesn't have time right now, if he's not on, that's okay too. He can come back to that, but I think it's something maybe that needs to be explained a little bit more for people to understand what actually it is and why. we have to do that?
Yeah, Mr. President, I'd be happy to touch on it. And I don't have all the answers yet, but Mr. Olsted and I discussed on Friday just briefly. The indoor air quality, the Department of Health and an organization called ASHRAE, which is kind of the standard on the expectation for how to maintain indoor air quality. When coronavirus first started, the Minnesota Department of Health put out essentially an air quality standard and ways to mitigate the spread of COVID through air droplets. And so we're looking at that within all the city buildings, the arenas being probably the biggest ones, both for the main capacity space where spectators would seat, as well as even in the locker room setting, how the air flows in those rooms. The majority of the mitigation, so to speak, is making sure that you have fresh air return back into the buildings. And a lot of the newer buildings in the city, I think, are a lot further along than the ice arenas are. The air handling systems within the ice arenas, in some cases, there is no fresh air return at all. An example of that would be like the VFW arena, the locker rooms. They just simply have an electric heater that blows electric heated air into the space with no duct work, no return. So there's essentially no air filtration at all within that room. So that's something that I'm working on with in conjunction with a few different potential contractors for how to be able to have some form of air movement or air purification added to a space like that. That would be one example of it. There's other examples like the Civic Center, the main seating space. Those air handlers there do have fresh air return on them. So again, fresh air return and higher quality filters is the first step. That's about 90% of our battle towards making sure that the air is cleaned. The remaining 10% is to add an air purifier to it. There's two different forms of that, either UVC lighting or bipolar ionization. There's a lot of mixed information coming out of the market on that right now on which one is best. Kind of depends on who you talk to and which one is preferred. Like the big university in Grand Forks, the UND is doing bipolar ionization in all of their buildings, while other places are using UVC lights. But the pricing that Karla is talking about in my case, and in the case of the arenas, largely that's what it is for any type of mitigation steps we can follow to meet ASHRAE recommendation on indoor air quality to make sure that if there are COVID air droplets circulating through the air, that the air can be cleaned to a degree that makes it more safe for people to be in.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking the time to explain that. Mr. Demers?
Almost forgot what I was going to say. Thank you, Mr. President. I guess in response to Mr. Hellman's comment about a different set of standards or perceived different set of standards for the city, and then what we're doing for, or the EDA is proposing doing for businesses, is I would say that that's part of what this money is designed to do. It's supposed to, this pot of money, there's been other pots, the mayor and president have talked about the PPP funds that have gone out. There's all kinds of other FEMA stuff and grants that have gone out. But this pot of money was specifically designed for state and local governments, and then to filter out to businesses if they have extra. I would say to that point, we heard it from Ms. Anderson that, there's $160,000 of potential costs. Well, whether you give $160,000 to businesses or we pay for it right now, that's 3% levy increase right there. So whether you look at it as giving cash to someone that's unaccountable to the system, there's no, the opportunity for us to hold businesses accountable is more difficult than it is for governments to be held accountable. Just once the money goes out to the door, it becomes less accountable. And like I said, it's just whether you pay for it now or pay for it later. I mean, we could raise our levy 3%, and every business, every resident will get hit with that. And I think the purpose of this money is to take care of those expenses that are directly related to this event or series of events. And I don't think it's changing the rules or holding us to a different standard. It's just part of what this money is supposed to do. So, we hear it all the time that, government is just whatever the people make it. Well, it's the same, it works backwards, and if we don't pay for this money or those things that we are actually spending, it's going to get paid for by all the people. And I just think, it's pretty laid out, pretty detailed in what we can spend it on, what we can't, and we will, I'm sure, go through audits and all those other things by these various agencies going forward if there's thoughts that we aren't using it appropriately. But, I have no problem spending it on overtime directly related to coronavirus or COVID-19 related causes. I don't think it's doing any damage to our businesses or anything like that. So, thank you.
Reid, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Olsted. I kind of agree with Mark on the fact that a lot of the businesses were entitled or able to apply for other grants, loans, other funding sources to pay for a lot of those types of expenses. What this is meant to do is just strictly under this CARES Act to cover these small, minor costs. Most of the smaller businesses are not going to see more than $1,000 or $2,000 in expenses, the mom and pop operations. So when you spread it all out, very few are going to reach that $5,000 limit. Those that are the larger ones are going to have $25,000, $30,000 in expenses. We're never going to help them recoup that total amount. This also doesn't help recoup lost revenue. There was a misconception that, oh, well, we've lost $200,000, $300,000 in lost revenue. We'll never do that. This money here was earmarked on an election year. Let's keep that in mind. The feds gave it to the state doled it out to the counties and the cities. Now we're sitting here with enough money to cover Band-Aid exposure on a huge gaping wound, and we're never, ever going to be able to help all these businesses the way we'd like to help them. I don't want to see one of them go out of business either. Hopefully they won't. Hopefully they'll be able to weather the storm. I think you're right. We got to get in touch with the governor. We got to set an example and send them a notice and say, hey, let's let our businesses open, because they're hurting. I'm one of them, and I'm here. I'm here to stay, but some of these guys won't be. That's all I've got.
Mr. Demers.
One last thing. And per the League of Minnesota Cities, the responsible party is the city in this. If they have there's a question there.
Mark, we can't hear you.
Sorry, turned it off. If the city does decide to put grants out there for businesses, and if one of those businesses was found to have used those funds inappropriately, the U.S. Treasury will not go after that business. It will go after the city. The city is the person that is the fiduciary, has a fiduciary responsibility to this money. So, like I said, not only do I think that we should do it for the economic reasons, but we have the responsibility to do it as well.
Thank you, sir. I have a couple comments, and I know Mayor has some comments. I know we've talked about this over the last couple of months here, and, we've talked a lot in the last couple of days of what we can do and how we can do it and who can we help. And, it's very difficult to see some of the businesses in our community not be able to be back at 100%, not be able to operate as they did, back in January or before, February. And it's with us to have this amount of money sitting there and trying to figure out how we can help everyone out and make them whole. You just keep racking your brain, and you're not going to do it. And that's what's difficult decision about this, of what we can do and how we can do it and how much money is, being offered. And I think we want to do what's best for every business. We want to do what's best for the community. I think everybody in this room wants to make sure that every business stays around. That's what makes our community. And I can't say this is something that we're taking lightly. And, I know I haven't. I've talked to the mayor a lot of, just asking, well, how can we do this? How can we make sure that everybody's taken care of? And there's not a right answer for it when you're tied to a dollar amount that's not going to make everybody whole. So I know the mayor's going to talk about what we think is going to be best right now, and we can have discussion on that, and hopefully we can come to an agreement of how to move forward and help the businesses somewhat. And we'll continue to do what we can and continue to talk to them and ask for their comments to get through this. So, Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. President. I think back to, and we can't make them whole, and it's a big sum of money. A lot of these folks have lost tremendous sums of money through COVID. I think back to the flood of 1997 for my day job. We had documentable losses over $500,000, and those went on to the SBA on a 30-year note to be repaid at 4%. And then coming out of nowhere, someone had a sum of around $30,000 that was raised on our behalf, and it was amazing. Suddenly that chunk that you did not have to repay, because a lot of your expenses did not fit any specific category, yet they were still expenses. And you may not have collateral to go back to the bank. Your collateral gets spread so thin that, just like sometimes happens in agriculture, you get spread so thin with your collateral, you go back to the bank for your operating line and they say, it's not there. It's not there. Well, the same is happening to these businesses. They want to borrow. They burned through, they had probably 3 to 6 months expenses saved up. They burned through that. This wasn't a 2-month hiccup. This has been much longer than that. And then they go back to the bank and borrow, maybe to their limit of their ability to borrow. And now when that's gone, it's going to be game over for them. And they work hard, and they really want to stay in business and keep serving our community, and they want to get over the hump and get back to good days and profit. So we didn't know. We were talking last week, should we allocate maybe $100,000 of this? And Karla took our early recommendation and put that into the RCA. But one thing we didn't know is how much need was out there. We didn't really have a good sense for what are we looking at. And it was a bit of an impasse that we were at with our EDA. The EDA was wanting to know how much will you allocate, and we're telling the EDA, well, we need to know what the need is before we will allocate. Well, there it is. It's an impasse. They couldn't initiate a program because they didn't know how much they had to give out, and we couldn't really feel good giving an allocation because we didn't know what the need was. So we did, and I want to thank Mr. Gorte, and I want to thank really everybody who's been involved with helping to reach out to our businesses. Barry from the chamber came through and sent off a follow-up email, and I did the same to try to get a sense of what's going on out there. And I got responses from about 20 businesses. I will share any of that with you in detail, but the stories are the same. It's kind of the things I talked about. It is, we thought we had saved for a rainy day, but it was hard to save for a rainy year. And many of them, even credible businesses, been around a long time, they're really going upside down in a hurry. And I understand we can't make them whole in a single stroke with this sum of money. We can't make them whole. But now we know that the magnitude of what's out there in terms of the kind of the financial hit that they've taken is more than I anticipated, more than I was aware of. And so consequently, I am going to recommend that we take of what's been identified here, of that $246,950, and we set that aside for this effort. And even before I say what I'm about to say, in a conversation with Mr. Gorte, Mr. Pukshavinsky, who's chair of the EDA, they were already talking about doing the application in 2 phases. And the beauty of doing it in 2 phases is Number one, you're going to catch some folks who didn't apply the first time. We're going to get some press coming out of this meeting. We're going to get some press coming out of the initial rollout. And some will say, that's too good to be true, or I'm too stubborn and bullheaded. Everyone has a reason to not do it, but no reason not to do it is good. They're all bad if you need it. If you had the kind of devastation of what I'm hearing from the 20 folks who responded, just swallow your pride, and you're in a point of need and say, yes, please. We've all had to do it. I've had to do it more than once. And then the good days come back and you're still standing and standing strong. What you don't want is to come back in a compromised condition, having spent down all your reserves, and now you have probably debt on debt. You came into this with a manageable debt load, come out of it with that plus an additional debt load. That debt on debt starts to eat your lunch even going forward. When your cash flows should be back to pretty good, the new debt makes it a lot harder to function. And so even before what I'm about to say and what we've spoken of between us, the two phases. And the first phase, again, would catch that group who did not apply the first time. You'd basically publish the same application again, give them a chance to come in the same way that the first group did, under the same limits, the same parameters. But you also now know what is available, what is remaining, and you could probably come in and fill up some of the bigger asks that you hit the top. You hit the limit, the 5,000 or whatever you all set in the EDA as the limit. Now that you've given out to everyone, you also know there were some who were way higher than that. And to that extent, now within the second phase, you can not only hit the group that did not apply, they're treated the same as the first group. You can probably come in and fill up some of those bigger asks, some of those bigger deficits that have been created by this, who coincidentally are also some of our most key businesses in our community. Businesses that anchor an area and that really everyone else enjoys the benefits that they enjoy because of the presence of those bigger businesses. So to me, in that second phase, that is what you would pick up. Again, round two, you'd bring in the same opportunity to apply if someone missed it, and the opportunity to maybe go in and fill up some of those bigger asks that you could not get to because you set that cap where you did. So again, that would be my recommendation. The need is way, way, way beyond this, and all that tells me is if the need is way beyond what we can meet, and it is, then we should do all we can. Right? We've hit all our hard costs to this point. We've tried to anticipate probably to year end, and that's great. Appreciate the hard work that went into that. And here, even after all of that, we show 246,950 that, granted, we could account for every penny, but the reality is they, I think, need it more than we do right now. And they are us. Right? They're the employers of our people, and they're the places that we like to shop and do business. So they're us. We're them. It's one thing. And yet I do believe, in my estimation, the dollars would be better used in this moment in that way. That's all I got.
Okay. So everybody understands you're talking about 100,000 first phase and then the balance.
In fact, they might only want to do 250 in the first phase. So no more than 100 in the first phase and hold out at least 150 in the second. And if the EDA decides to do 250 and hold the 250, I'm totally fine with that too. But we could say allocate the 246,950. Please hold out at least 150 of it for your second phase.
Tim.
No, I'd rather see that we give them $100,000. They have $350 to work with, and then we reserve the right to come in at a later time if we feel there's a need, and they can prove there's a need for that other balance.
Oh, it's there. The need is there. It's there. I promise you the need is there.
But I don't want to get into the good old boy syndrome where the big boys make out looking like a bandit and the rest of us are looking like nothing.
We can influence even that. You know, the chair of their EDA, Mike Pukshavinsky, has said, I would love to coordinate with the council on this. It's important to get it right. They're not trying to take this under their little umbrella, but they really are tasked with this. We have tasked them with this, but they want our input every step of the way.
I still want us to hold on to that 146 to have final say on that.
Yeah, and that's one opinion. I hope we'll allocate it all. And that's a show of good faith to the business. We could balk at the last minute and say, you know what, you haven't convinced us, that 146, you can't have it. Whereas we're putting the word out to our businesses, there will be a second phase. how we use that second phase, let's wait and see. But it's coming, count on it. And hey, by the way, if you missed the first one, you're not really out anything. I really, as a show of good faith, I'd like to see us make it available. And of course, it all comes back. If the need happens not to be there, the unused portion, we would stipulate it would come on back to us.
Do we have final say on how the money, when the money's given, who's it given to, or does the EDA? That's why I want to keep the 146 with us, so that we have some say down the line.
And I guess I trust them with our cooperation. That's how I feel.
Mr. Vetter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have any problem with holding everything. They've got an application. They can send the application out, and they can bring in the applications and say, we've got applications for $400,000 just in the first go-around. And then we can say, okay, here's your $200,000 then, or whatever we need. I don't have any problem with that. Let's get the applications out and see what the need is.
Right, I thought the application should have been, they should have sent them just because they had the 250,000 already. And if they exceed that amount, then I agree with you. Then we can give them more. I just don't want to hand them carte blanche and say, here it is, do as you see fit.
And that's where I'm at. I mean, send the application out and see what their need is, and then we'll decide how much we're going to push over there.
I agree.
It might all get used up in the first round.
If it does, it does.
Yep.
I'd sure feel better earmarking the whole thing. And there they have something to work with.
They have $250,000 to work.
They should have 5. The need is so far beyond that. Nobody's questioning that the need is.
And we don't, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mike.
But we don't know we have 2 months left before we have to allocate things. We're about to open up our winter sports, our recreation programs. I know Reid's looked ahead and tried to, ensure things, but we're going to all of a sudden be bringing a bunch of kids into facilities. We're going to try to, I would hope someday we're going to open up our building to allow for people to come in. We haven't really looked at what access management is going to look like here in any real great detail. We have a library that still isn't 100% open to the public. We haven't opened up our buildings yet, and we don't know what that cost is going to be. So there is an X factor from the city side. What happens when we try to open these things up and we end up spending $150,000 and we've already earmarked this for hand sanitizers around places that we don't know if they need them or not. I mean, I get it, the need is out there, but I believe that there's need at the city level as well. And if we spend it and we allocate it before it's even then.
Hey, Mark, turn your speaker on.
Do it so I don't cough into it. But you understand what I'm saying is, there's a couple months yet, and there's, to your point, you've said it before, it's better to keep your, a reserve. You never know. Why? I don't see what the hurry is to just shove it all into this thing when we don't have any idea how it's going to go.
Here's the urgency. First of all, I would say I'd love to hear from Nancy Ellis to the point of we really don't have an idea how to reopen this building. We don't have a plan in place. It's going to be weird like that. Nancy, are you with us?
She is not with us tonight.
Okay. Well, Nancy's worked out a very detailed reopening plan. She has all the goober guards in place and the hand sanitizers and all the disinfecting, and she has worked out a very detailed reopening plan. Charlotte, in her own building, has worked out a very detailed reopening plan, and they are now beginning to reopen in a limited way. By appointment, you can come in and browse the stacks, use the computers. It's happening. It's all planned for. It's a well-known commodity. There's always a wild card, but a city with a budget of how many $1 million our budget is that has reserves higher than any of us really want to have can suck that up a lot more than a mom and pop business that's depleted their reserves, has borrowed money, and is teetering on failure. See, we can handle it better than they can right now. That's how I see it.
Mr. Helms.
The thing of it is, what you just said there, Mr. Demers, is you're telling the businesses that they need to know what their expenses are right now. And you're sitting here saying the city wants to wait for 2 months to find out what their expenses are going to be. Those businesses can't wait for 2 months to see what their expenses are going to be. I'm sitting here telling you, if you give them another 2 months, and you're going to see an awful lot of empty buildings in East Grand Forks. And back to what Mr. Reapel said, Mayor, we got to get hold of that governor and tell him we're opening up. We have to do it. We just can't wait anymore. It cannot wait anymore. We're just going to have to tell him we got to do it.
And even that, whether we want to really talk about this or not, even the reopening and the success of our reopening is going to be the extent to which we can let people know they're safe in our places of business. And the only way that happens is, for a business that's already behind the 8 ball, it's going to be hard to get all the PPE that they need and whatever else. I know there's one business that wants to put in also an air purifier, and they'll promote that. In our space, we're purifying the air, we're taking out any impurities in the air, including viruses and bacteria and molds and fungi and the whole thing. And whatever we can do, and that all costs money. And it's going to be a hard cost related to COVID, and it's going to be to improve the goodwill of their customer coming back in. I don't care. You can reopen. A lot of these places have been reopened, and they have this 50% capacity, and they're not coming anywhere near it because consumers are nervous and uneasy and reluctant to jump back in. So we need to equip these businesses with ways of putting in place these COVID improvements and promoting that so that customer confidence can come back up. This is not just the governor limiting it. It is the preference of consumers to stay away to some extent. We just need to show them we can do it safely, and we're going above and beyond to create a safe environment for you and your family to come into. And it costs money.
Because the governor's put the fear in God people. That's why they don't want to go out.
It's around the world. It's across the whole globe right now.
Mr. Vedder.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the application. We got it where it closes October 2nd. So after October 2nd, when we know how much need is out there, then we can come back and allocate what we want. I don't see a problem with that. If you know that there's a need out there, Mayor, then there's no problem in sending out the application and getting all that need on the table. And if the need is 100,000, then we allocate 100,000. If the need is 200,000, we allocate 200,000. If the need is 250,000, then we allocate 250,000. I don't see a problem with that.
Does your plan allow for a round 2?
Depends on the need. And if round 1 takes 250,000, we don't have any funds for round 2.
Well, we kind of do because they got 250 from the county.
I'm looking at the amount for the city. If you want to add it all in, whatever that amount is, if it uses up all the counties and all the city's funds, then there won't be a round 2. And you're telling me there's a need out there, a definite need out there, so let's see it. If it all gets used up in round 1, we're done.
Although we're limiting it, right? We're putting that limit on a per application.
Of 5,000.
And honestly, for one, that would be above and beyond their need, and for another, it would be 10% or less of their need. So perhaps in the round 2, because they are a higher volume business.
If I were advising a business when they're applying for this, if they've got $10,000 worth of expenses, I would say include $10,000 worth of expenses, because they might throw out this one or that one and they only give you $5,000 anyway. But if you just submit $5,000, if they throw out a $1,000 one, now you're only getting $4,000.
Right on.
So put everything in there that you need funding for.
But what if they have 90? Just as an example.
Put it in there.
Put it in there.
In the
they
first
get
round,
5.
all they're going to get is 5.
That's right.
If we've got enough money, then it goes to round 2.
That's it. And that's where I think to let people know on the front end that the round 2 is coming. We do anticipate, based on simple math, that there will be some funds available, and we'd like to distribute those according to need.
So now you're telling me the need isn't that great, and it won't get all used up in round 1.
Not when you limit it at 5.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, Karla.
Okay, you talk about mom and pop shops. I know, for example, Foster and Thief River Falls, they're limiting to businesses that have 1 to 20 full-time employees. And I don't know where we're at on that or what your feelings are on that. The other thing is that there are strict guidelines. This is the federal government. We will have a federal audit. And these are our expenses, and we have to make sure we're following the rules, because if we don't follow the rules, it's against us, not the business. That's why we looked at specific costs so that we could verify them and not the revenue, which we all know there's a need. But that's why we looked at those expenses already done, so that when the auditors come in, they can say, yes, this is a COVID expense. Yes, this is a COVID expense. And we are monthly reporting to the state of Minnesota, which the state of Minnesota then sends to the federal government. So every month I have to send a report to the state on what the city's dollars, that $668,000 has been spent on in specific areas which are outlined in the data reporting sheet. Just so you're all aware of that.
Thank you, ma'am. I know there's been some good discussion on this and we're trying to figure out what is the right way to do this. And I think I'm going to throw this out there. If we think the need's going to be out there for the full 246, let's just round it up to 250. Let's not even talk 246 anymore. Would everybody feel comfortable? And we had a working group with the EDA and 2 members of the council and the mayor and Mr. Murphy, the city administrator, I'm assuming Karla would be on there too, and I'm not sure who else, to work with this and to make sure that we're doing the right thing and taking care of everybody that we need to take care of, so that your needs are met, Mr. Riepel, everybody else's needs are met that has questions on this, that if we say, well, hey, we're going to commit up to this 250, we want to be part of this group working together, so that we know that everybody's in this community is taken care of. I mean, would that solve some of your, apprehensions?
I agree with that fact. I also agree with the fact, Mr. Vetter, that we just give them, let's get the applications out and see what the need is before we give them the dollars.
I understand your point, and could we say we're committed up to 250 as long as there's need? I mean, does anybody have a problem with that? And then we have a working group.
Problem with that.
So that
I just don't want to say
we can work together with the EDA, and and we can do what we can for the community and businesses, and just go move on.
You had to go and be the peacemaker, didn't you? No, I think that's smart. I think that's fine. We send the right signal that we're gonna leave those funds earmarked if the need is there, and I'm totally fine with that. I think that sends the right message also. Just like Karla's saying, dot your I's and cross your T's as you administer this. Of course, Mr. Galstad better be close by every step of the way.
Can we get one more thing done? I know it's segueing off of this, but we asked, and Nancy asked not too long back, that if we find a way to register the businesses with the city so we know who's operating within our city limits. So if the EDA is doing this now, can we get them to start getting a list together so that we can use that for future? Who knows, we could have a tornado, we could have a blizzard. What do we do with businesses? Who are they? Where are they at?
You'll be happy to know that right through the time of COVID, such a list was really cleaned up. Nancy led the effort. Paul Gorte came in. It was cleaned up more with the chamber. All these databases were pulled together and purged and cleaned, and people changed email addresses or cell phone numbers, and those things were cleaned up. We're way ahead of that as compared to the beginning of the year. And it's maintained in both locations. Nancy has need of it in her office,
right,
and Paul has need of it in his. But it's probably going to be a work in progress, how dynamic those things are.
Well, it's an ever-changing thing.
It's ever-changing, yep. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. That connection and that knowledge is good.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments at this time?
I just have
Karla?
one more thing.
Yep.
That the businesses that are located outside of city limits can be part of the process, but their dollars will come from Polk County. And Paul can interject if I'm not correct, but so this is also open to businesses outside of the city limits, but they will not come out of the city's dollars.
Polk County has set aside $175,000 for unincorporated businesses, and Boston and ourselves are working with Polk County because Polk County does not have the mechanisms to do this, to make sure that the dollars get sent out to the unincorporated business, and the businesses that are located in the unincorporated parts of the county.
Is the county then liable for those businesses if money's given?
What we will do is the same thing that we're requiring here is everything is a reimbursement, Mr. Riopel.
Okay.
So that nothing will be sent out unless it has already been approved as a COVID-related expense.
Yeah, but if they would, are we responsible like that, like Mr. Demers stated, or would the county then be responsible for them?
That's a legal question that you'll have to, I can't.
I don't know that we can answer that at this time, but we can find that out.
Okay.
And I think what we'll do is just work it out, depending on who pays the check.
That's scary.
So if Polk County reimburses us, it'll just be added onto the $250 we've already gotten. So when the auditors come in, say it's $240, it's $270 that we'll have spent to businesses and that we'll have to provide to auditors.
Yeah, we're
And
responsible.
that's something we'll work with Polk County. And
Thank
we
you.
can update you on that.
Right, and Mr. Demers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one other thing, Mr. Gorte. How does this work in conjunction with the dollars that EDA took out of its own funds to, with the loan program that it funded earlier in the year? Is this in addition to, or is it supplementary? Can this be used to pay off that loan or pay off part of that loan?
Remember that the program that EDA has suggested is based on reimbursement for actual expenses. So it's the same as when you pay for something, one of your bills, and then you have, once you've done that, and you get paid back for that, maybe a medical bill, and you get paid back from your insurance afterwards. You may or may not use that money on that particular expense. You may use it on something else. But all expenses have to be done by no later than the November. Basically, for us, it's November 15th, and we're setting an earlier date on that so that it's all expenses that have been paid, not future expenses. So these are things that where they're reimbursing themselves, or getting reimbursement for expenses that have already occurred.
Well, I guess my point is if a business took debt from the EDA and decided to, which would be an expense, I would imagine, and chose to use $5,000 to pay off that note, is that a valid expense?
How the expenses that we're talking about that would be reimbursed, Mark, are those expenses for equipment, PPE, and things like that that have already occurred. It has nothing to do, and how they use the money once they receive it is going to be a business decision on how they survive with that.
Right, but was it the loan program that you guys ran was for those same type things, right?
Not necessarily.
I mean, or they could have
been used for that. It could have been used for any type of expenses to help the businesses survive.
Mark, the short answer is no.
Okay.
Thank you, Ron.
An attorney giving a short answer. Wow.
I
This is
thought
a good
attorneys
day.
got paid by the word.
Anything else, Mr. Demers?
No, not right now. We'll talk about it next week.
Mr. Galstad.
The only thing that I was going to say is if the city of East Grand Forks or the EDA is going to be operating a reimbursement or a grant fund for the county, we should enter into an agreement that says such so that there's no question. And I don't think that there would be a question anyway, but they would be the ones that would be responsible for reimbursement upon auditing and not the city.
Ron, we did an agreement with them for the $250. So if we end up paying it and they reimburse us, I would guess we would just do another RCA and a resolution with that other dollar amount to cover ourselves. But Paul and I would check with Chuck
That was your question, wasn't
to
it?
see what he'd like to do.
That's a tongue twister, yes. I agree with you, Karla.
So if there is any, we would just blame it on the first 250 that the county gave us.
But it doesn't matter, because when the county gives us the money, now it's our responsibility to make sure the guidelines are followed, and the auditors will actually check our records. So basically, the 250 is no longer the county's unless we don't spend it and we send it back.
I don't think we have that problem anyway, because we're going to do the right thing.
I don't think so.
Let's just. All right, anything else on this? I see none. Thanks for the discussion. I'm going to circle back and do number 4 before we move on to number 7. So we're going to go back to request for quick claim deed for 221 Central Avenue Northwest. Mr. Galstad, turn your camera back on.
Yes, essentially there is a property at 221 Central Avenue Northwest that has a garage that's encompassed in the entire lot. It's been there for many, many years. I'm finding out now when I'm looking through some information that the city actually even gave them a loan for that property. It's now being discovered through the probate process that this small sliver where the garage is sitting on city property. From my understanding, there's no need for easements, utility easements, or anything. It's an unbuildable lot, and I believe that it was errantly transferred to the city a while ago. To find out all those details would be cost prohibitive. What I was suggesting is that we just sign a quitclaim deed over to the property owners, which is basically just being done through a probate right now, and let them get the house sold.
You have any questions for Mr. Galstad on that? I see none. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Move on to number 7, discussion on ballot question regarding charter. Mr. Murphy and Ms. Nelson.
Yeah, I guess I can start with this. As far as the wording that's going on the ballot and the what needs to be published and all that is pretty straightforward, and I believe we have a pretty good handle on that. I guess what we're looking at is for some brainstorming ideas between now and the election on how to get word out, how to get people informed, or voting population informed of what they're actually voting on and what the purpose of it is and what it would do. We have some of the typical ones. I mean, it'll be in the paper, we'll put it on our website, those type of things. But just like to have any ideas or any brainstorming on how to get the word out. Some of the discussions that we've had, I believe, Ron, you came up with the idea of could we use, or could some of the members of the Charter Commission speak to people? Could they have like an online or interact, like a Zoom type meeting where they could answer questions, those type of things? So I guess what we're looking to hear from the council is any further ideas on what you'd like to see as far as getting that word out to the public, so that when they do go into the ballot, particularly since the absentee ballots are going to be coming out soon, how to get the word out to the people. So just looking for some input. Ron?
The only other question, I think Megan suggested it, is that the mayor, after each of these meetings, does a public service announcement like he typically does anyways, to get that information out, and then potentially use some other mechanisms, possibly even iHeartMedia, do some public service announcements, because people who listen to that with a short blurb on not advertising for or against, but just letting them know it's a summary of what we are doing, is updated the charter, essentially hadn't been done for 40 years, brought it current, and so then it's going to be on the ballot. The Charter Commission, since there isn't any restrictions, they personally, since they have knowledge of it, could actually speak in favor of the amendment that they presented forward, and it may be beneficial to have some of those members involved in getting the word out.
Even like say radio or something along those lines too.
Thank you.
Somebody have any ideas for Mr. Murphy? Mayor?
I will help out in any way as needed. If you need me to speak to it following meetings, I'm happy to do that. And yeah, whatever else you need from me, let me know. And I trust you guys will do it well. Up to now, elections have gone on pretty seamlessly around here. Mr. Galstad can keep us on the right side of the law. Life's good.
Anybody else have anything? I don't think anybody has any ideas other than what you guys already went through, so.
Okay, we'll keep doing the best. And I think just one thing I want to keep in mind with this, what Rod alluded to earlier, is that as city council and city staff, we're a little bit more bound by what we can say or how we can say it. We can't be quite as persuasive or than say like the Charter Commission can. So we will be working with them to see what benefit we can have with that.
Is there any opportunity to put a note in the utility billing?
I think that would be a great idea, Mark, if it's possible. Just give them a summary of what's going on. Wouldn't have to be just a paragraph.
And we run our online television station too. There could be something running on that at a pretty good interval. That would get it out pretty well. I'm surprised. A lot of folks at the Good Sam, for example, they watch that pretty religiously. And I think a lot of people do.
Anybody else have anything? Mr. Helms.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we going to have the regular polling places open for the election in November? East Grand Forks is, so.
All 5 polling places will be open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m.
All 5 will be open from 7 to 8, so then residents will be able to go and do their voting without worrying about the mail-in votes and all that stuff. Perfect. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything on number 7? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Vetter. Second by Repel. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried, means adjourned.